Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fresh Perspectives podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Lauren, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. 2 years ago, I quit social media cold turkey. What started as a 40-day mission for Lent turned into going without social media for nearly half a year. In today's episode, I reflect on that experience and the surprising things that I learned from it. I was inspired to make this episode because of my conversation that I had on last week's episode with my friend Meg. If you haven't had a chance to listen to Meg's episode, I highly recommend giving it a listen. Not only does Meg have this infectious energy that will leave you jazzed up, what she says about social media and how she's using it for good versus being consumed by things like rage bait is really inspiring. So if you've been a little bit curious about what life can look like without social media or even a reduced social media diet, this episode is for you. So diving into social media, I think it's really important. And Meg said this in her episode very well. She said that she was noticing in her life that she was kind of becoming reliant on social media to the point where she couldn't focus at work. And so she had to scroll. And I think we've all had a similar experience where we get this kind of dopamine hit when we're scrolling TikTok or Instagram. I want to dial in on really getting in tune with how social media is making you feel. So, Meg, obviously, it was a distraction. I've had a similar experience where I actively feel my brain being like, oh, I need to scroll and I need a break. I think another thing that was interesting and a reason that I actually got off TikTok, I was on TikTok during COVID. It was a hard time. We obviously all needed some smiles and some relief. But what I didn't like about TikTok was that I was getting content that I wasn't opting into. And so I had engaged with some what I eat in a day videos. And then all of a sudden, my entire timeline was about food. And it really hijacks your brain because if every time you're going to a place to get a little bit of relief and dopamine in your brain, you're being fed this content about food and eating, it really just hijacks what you're thinking about all day. I like to talk about, your social media diet. So platforms where you can opt into the content that you're consuming, making sure that that content works for you. And I just want to pause here and say, you are in total control of the content that you opt into when it comes to who you follow. Obviously, these platforms are pushing different content and trying to guess what kind of content you like based on what you engage with, but who you follow is a choice. And so I'll give you an example of Instagram. I have been interested in fashion and style lately. Shout out to Tanya for her amazing episode where we talked all about style. And we talked about personal style, and I think it gets a little murky, and she talked about this as well. When, you look at Pinterest and you look at Instagram and everything feels so curated. And, that's what you're seeing all the time. These people who are all kind of dressing in the same way. And you start to think like, well, why do I not dress in that way? I'm seeing a certain type of fashion. It dims my inner voice and does not allow me to get in tune with what I actually really like. And I think that is really powerful. The thoughts that you're having and the desires you have and the things that you want to do, the things you want to purchase, the places you want to go. There is an inner voice that drives those decisions. And I do feel that it can get a little murky when social media starts to influence that inner voice in your head. And so I encourage everybody, if you are feeling like you are in the social media ecosystem and maybe your brain feels hijacked and maybe you don't even feel that way. And I encourage you to just kind of get quiet and see, how does social media make me feel? When I go onto these platforms, how do I feel afterwards? Are my thoughts 100% my own? Do they feel heavily influenced? And just kind of do this awareness strategy and see how it makes you feel. So 2 years ago, I quit social media cold turkey. And it was because I was feeling this exact way. I felt like the thoughts in my head weren't my own. I felt like I didn't have the mental white space to have my own creative thoughts and be in tune with what I really want and who I really am. And so I decided to shut it off. It was something I did for Lent a few years ago. So I committed to not going on social media for 40 days. In tandem, I also started walking a lot more. And I will tell you, in the first 2 weeks, the amount of times my thumb went to where the Instagram app was on my phone that was no longer there was a lot, like almost concerningly a lot. I don't think I realized how intuitive that was of just like opening your phone, immediately going to a certain app. And so that was really surprising to me that like physically in my body, I had remembered and had these patterns in place. And when I quit social media, I felt so empowered. I felt like my world got a lot smaller, but not necessarily for the worse. I think it was for the better. And what I mean by that is it was only what was happening in my physical life, in my physical communities, outside my door, at my workplace, with my family, with my friends, that was taking up most of my thoughts. There were so many instances where, people were like, "Did you see this? Have you heard about that?" And I would say, "No." And it was shocking to me how much I didn't know about things. And I do think, it shone a light on how much I rely on social media to get my news. Obviously, I want to know what's going on in my local community. I want to know what's going on in the world. And so I had to figure that out, how am I getting news? But yeah, it made me realize what a shared culture the internet is. And not knowing what was going on kind of felt empowering. And I felt the same way when I quit TikTok. There were these trends, songs would come back. I remember Running Up That Hill was coming back, and I was like, wow, this song, from the 80s is like everywhere now. Why is that? Oh, it's trending on TikTok. And to this day, I am not back on TikTok because I just feel, knowing myself, it was becoming way too addicting. And it was really that time before bed where I felt like I could not stop scrolling. And, it interfered with me going to bed on time. I'd be up way later than I was planning to. And I just didn't like that. And I remember quitting social media, in addition to feeling out of the loop, I also felt like I had a lot more free time. So that whole chunk before bed, I had free time. Even chunks in my day, I had free time. And that's why I decided to take on getting outside for 45 minutes, going on a walk every day, because I just had this time. And social media, giving that up, paired with 45 minutes of going on a walk. Sometimes I listen to music, sometimes I listen to a podcast, sometimes I would listen to nothing. I just felt like my brain had space to explore. And it was on those walks that I got ideas for creating this podcast, things I wanted to create in communities, and just letting your mind wander. I feel like we don't do that enough these days. We don't just let our minds kind of wander. It almost feels like how it feels when you take a shower. And honestly, if we think about it, showering is probably the only time you don't have a screen in front of you, whether it's a computer, TV, a phone. And that's why you have shower thoughts, because you're in this state of flow. You're feeling a physical sensation, and your mind is not being influenced by anything. And so I encourage you, if you've ever been a bit curious about what life could look like without social media, with limited social media, I encourage you to take that step. And I know in these days, this kind of has become a trend of its own, where there are certain apps and certain devices where you can limit your time on certain platforms. But this is something that you can do yourself as well. I mean, when you get into bed, set a timer, see how much time you're scrolling for. I think that awareness of how much you're using it and why you're using it and when you're using it is the first step to being able to change some of those habits. And I would encourage you not to judge yourself. I, again, was really surprised how much time I was spending and how much of a time suck it was. And I felt shame and I felt guilty for all this wasted time. But all we can do is be aware of where our time is going. And then it gives us more power to decide, is that where we want our time to be going? Or do we want to change that? And I'll close with this thought. I think it's also really important to consider what void social media is filling. I think we go onto these platforms for a lot of different reasons. I know I've had certain instances in my life where I've looked to social media as a way for connection. So, again, I'm going to tie this back to another podcast episode. But Anne, who founded Girl Gone International, was saying how she used social media to inspire real life connection. When you're moving to a new city or you're just trying to meet new people for whatever reason, social media can be a great tool to doing that. And so maybe for you, social media is that connection. Maybe you're part of online communities and that's where you feel a sense of belonging. Social media could also act as entertainment, right? Like we like to watch other people's lives. We're naturally curious people. It can also act as a sense of escapism. So maybe there's something that we're trying to get away from. Again, scrolling during work, maybe we're trying to distract ourselves from doing something that we don't want to do, or we use it as a way to procrastinate. And again, I say none of this with any kind of judgment. I think it's just a way to get in tune with how we're using things. I really believe that knowledge is power. My library card actually says that exact quote. Knowing why you're doing something, knowing how much you're doing something gives you the power to decide if that's okay with you. And that's all I really want to get at here. I think social media is great. And I think, again, it connects so many people. It unites us in kind of a universal culture. But I also think there are some really concerning parts of it. And I think it is on every single one of us to decide, what those boundaries are for ourselves and to realize that in-person connection and in-person community can also be fulfilling. And using social media as a means and a way to make those in-person connections can be really powerful. This has been another episode of the Fresh Perspectives podcast. If this episode resonated with you, I encourage you to share it with a friend. I think the more that we have these conversations, the better. I think social media is something that we've had for a lot of our lifetimes. Some of us, we've had it for our entire lifetimes. And as we grow up and as the world changes, I think it's important to reevaluate and be aware of what kind of role we want it to play in our lives. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.